06:41 a.m., April 12, 1943. RAF Station Northolt, England. A gray morning settles over the airfield as Flight Lieutenant Jonathan Hale buttons his flight jacket and studies the briefing pinned to a clipboard. He was supposed to run today's training sortie. Routine exercises, formation practice, nothing more. But a dispatch rider arrives with a sealed envelope, still damp from the mist. The operations officer reads it twice before handing it to Hale. Training is postponed. You're flying combat. Squadron needs you, immediately. Hale stares at the order, the distant growl of engines building behind him. He wasn't meant for this sortie. Not today. They thought they had understood the war, but what they saw changed everything. The wind sweeps across the dispersal area, carrying the faint smell of fuel, grass, and cold metal. Mechanics stride between aircraft, their boots echoing on concrete. A radio in the operations hut crackles with clipped, hurried voices. In the distance, a truck rattles past with boxes of spare parts stacked like fragile bricks. Hale stands alone beside his fighter. A cup of tea grows cold on the wing root, untouched. His leather gloves hang from one hand, the other gripping the dispatch that just changed his morning. And perhaps much more. Inside the briefing room, newly trained pilots huddle around a chalkboard. They speak in low tones, unsure whether today will be their first operational flight. Hale was supposed to guide them, steady them, teach them how to climb, dive, recover, survive. Instead, he feels the old, familiar tension tightening in the air, like the calm just before a storm touches the edge of a coastline. The engines of two fighters cough to life. Propellers blur. The squadron leader signals him forward. Hale takes one last breath of the morning air, heavy with dew and doubt, and climbs into the cockpit. For months, command believed Hale's place was on the ground. His instructors spoke of his precision, his calm voice, his ability to break complex maneuvers into simple, teachable steps. They needed him to create pilots, not become one again. The logic seemed airtight. Training squadrons needed experienced flight leaders. Combat squadrons had enough veteran pilots. Replacement pools were filling steadily. Enemy air activity had tapered in the region. Reports from intelligence claimed the Luftwaffe's presence was lighter than earlier in the war. New pilots could learn under safer skies. Training units were considered sheltered, predictable, manageable. Even Hale believed it. He thought his war would be fought on chalkboards and airstrips, not in the narrow sky where seconds meant everything. He sharpened pencils instead of turning guns. He analyzed mistakes instead of firing bursts. He taught young airmen who had never experienced combat. The assumption held firm. He was more valuable training pilots than flying into danger himself. But cracks began to show. Veteran squadrons wore thin. Night raids increased. Enemy fighters appeared unexpectedly along coastal routes. Dispatches hinted at heavy casualties in neighboring groups. Then the order came. Simple, direct, inevitable. He would fly today. Not as an instructor, but as a combat pilot. But beneath the triumph, the first cracks had already formed. The squadron climbed through layers of pale morning cloud. Hale kept his formation tight, eyes scanning the bright horizon. Radar stations had reported unidentified aircraft moving inland. Nothing more. At 12,000 feet, the first glimmer appeared. Small specks, no larger than dust motes. Hale narrowed his eyes. The specks grew, sharpened, multiplied. "Contact! 11 o'clock high," someone reported through static. Moments later, silhouettes emerged. Sleek wings, distinct noses. the unmistakable shapes of enemy fighters glinting in the sun. A full staffel, more than a dozen aircraft. Hale's assumption of light enemy activity collapses instantly. The radio chatter spikes. They're diving. Keep formation. Keep formation. Break. Break. The sky fractures into movement. Hale's training instincts kick in. He pulls into a climbing turn, watching a fighter flash beneath him. He grips the stick, feeling the engine strain against altitude. The enemy formation splits, half rushing the rear bombers, half turning toward the escorts. Data hits his mind faster than he can speak. Altitude advantage to the enemy, sun at their backs, multiple aircraft converging, outnumbered nearly 2-1. He banks hard. A fighter streaks past, too fast for the pilot to adjust. Hale rolls behind him, positioning carefully, keeping distance, trained precision, overcoming surprise. A short burst. The enemy breaks away, smoke trailing faintly. Another dives on his wingman. Hale angles downward, intercepting with a textbook defensive maneuver. His wingman escapes. The enemy overshoots. Hale climbs sharply, reversing position. The radio cracks with more fragments. Heavy resistance. 2 on my tail. Need support. Where's red section? Below, bombers push steadily across the coastline. Hale can see flashes of sunlight on their wings, engines humming in tight formation. Then another enemy pair arrives. Fresh, aggressive. Their approach is coordinated, precise. Hale angles into a shallow dive, outmaneuvering their line. One breaks off, the other commits. Hale rotates, holding a perfect defensive spiral. Every move drilled into his students countless times. He watches the enemy pilot commit to the chase, pulling tighter and tighter. At the final moment, Hale cuts power, drops flaps, lets the enemy overshoot by inches, then climbs directly into his blind spot. A soft exhale, a brief squeeze of the trigger. The enemy breaks away and withdraws. The sky settles. The radio goes from frantic to focused. The engagement lasts less than 8 minutes. But in those 8 minutes, Hale's role shifts forever, from instructor to survivor, from teacher to frontline pilot. Silence follows, and in that silence, truth becomes undeniable. Hours later, Hale sits alone on an overturned fuel drum near the dispersal hut. His hands are still trembling slightly, though he hides them in his pockets. The sun is higher now, warming the airfield, drying the morning dew into faint white patches on the tarmac. Around him, ground crew move steadily, checking wings, loading equipment, scribbling notes on maintenance sheets. Pilots mill about, talking in low voices, piecing together the morning's action. But Hale feels distant, as though watching the world through a documentary lens. He hears footsteps. The squadron leader approaches, hands clasped behind his back. "Hale," he begins, "you performed beyond expectations. 2 confirmed defensive saves. 1 enemy aircraft disengaged directly from your maneuver." Hale nods, eyes down. His mind replays every second of the engagement. The sun glare, the shapes diving from above, the sudden clarity that overcame the chaos. "You're on the roster now," the leader continues. "Combat flights only. The training unit will get along fine." Hale looks up slowly. He had trained pilots to survive moments like this. He had drawn diagrams, run drills, repeated warnings about altitude, angles, speed. But the truth hit him fuller now than ever before. The war no longer needed instructors. It needed fighters. He swallows hard, the realization settling like weight in his chest. The squadron leader places a hand on his shoulder. "You're exactly where we need you." Hale watches a pair of young pilots laughing across the yard, faces bright, untested, unaware of how quickly a sky can turn. One of them carries a notebook filled with Hale's own diagrams. He stands, brushing dust from his trousers. He walks back to his aircraft, the same one he used for training flights. But it feels different now. Heavier, sharper, more real. A ground crewman is polishing soot from the nose cone, leaving small smudges on his sleeves. Hale runs a hand along the metal edge and feels the vibration of an engine cooling beneath the paneling. This machine, this plane, this responsibility. None of it feels like theory anymore. He sits on the wing, staring across the field as a new formation takes off, climbing steadily into the blue. He whispers quietly, not to anyone but himself, "I'm not going back to Chalkboards." The shift is complete. The instructor is gone. The pilot remains. He knew it then. Not might be lost. Was lost. Not the battle. Not the squadron. But the idea that he belonged anywhere except the sky. Hale's sudden reassignment wasn't an accident. It was the result of deeper patterns. Structural weaknesses within the air campaign that had been building for months. The first mechanism was attrition. Even with new pilots graduating weekly, losses on the front line drained experienced squadrons faster than training units could replenish them. The second mechanism was shifting enemy tactics. The Luftwaffe concentrated attacks on bomber routes, forcing Allied fighters to respond with more aggressive escort missions. This required seasoned pilots, not students. The third mechanism was logistical strain. Airfields closer to the front lacked spare instructors. They needed pilots who could fly immediately, without additional preparation. The fourth mechanism was operational urgency. Allied command escalated pressure on strategic targets, expanding missions and stretching the availability of veteran aviators. The fifth mechanism was training bottlenecks. New pilots needed more experience before facing the enemy. Command realized that only instructors, pilots who had mastered the fine margins of flight, could bridge the gap quickly. The sixth mechanism was psychological necessity. Squadrons hit hard by losses needed someone calm, analytical, and methodical. Hale's reputation as a steady instructor made him an anchor in the chaos. The seventh mechanism was timing. His reassignment came exactly when weather, intelligence, and enemy movements converged, forcing even ground reserve personnel into the air. And the final mechanism was inevitability. Once the air war intensified, no experienced pilot could remain solely in the classroom. Every capable aviator would eventually be drawn into combat. Hale's success, the first kills, the first narrow escapes, came not from aggression, but from familiarity. He had practiced the maneuvers so deeply that instinct replaced fear. He acted while others hesitated. He turned theory into survival. Why did he shoot down 8 fighters? Not because he was reckless, not because he sought glory, but because the mechanisms that failed around him forced him to become something different. A teacher turned combat tactician. A calm presence turned battlefield anchor. A mentor turned protector. His students saw diagrams. Hale saw application. The enemy saw precision they did not expect. This is the deeper truth of the air war. Victories were often the result of systems breaking, and the individuals who rose to fill the cracks. Hale never asked for the role, but the circumstances demanded it. And he answered. By the end of the summer flying season, Hale's tally reached 8 enemy fighters engaged and neutralized across multiple missions. Each engagement revealed not heroics, but method. Calm evaluations in seconds where emotion could not fit. Word spread across nearby airfields. The instructor who became an ace. The man who teaches by flying. The calm one. Ground crews nodded politely when he walked by. Young pilots sought him out during briefings, asking quiet questions about maneuvers he once sketched on chalkboards. He answered patiently, never glamorizing what he'd done. For him, each victory felt less like triumph and more like confirmation that he belonged in the sky, not as a teacher, but as a guardian. When autumn rains arrived, Hale stood on the runway watching water beat across the wings of his aircraft. His squadron had changed. Newer pilots, new faces, quieter greetings. The war continued, but the front shifted, bringing the eventual end into sight. Hale reflected on the strange path that brought him here. A man ordered to teach, who became a protector. A pilot expected to remain behind, who stepped forward. A voice meant to guide others, that guided himself into the center of the war. He felt no exhilaration, no boastfulness, just a quiet understanding. His 8 victories were chapters in a larger story, not of him, but of a system that turned instructors into combat pilots, students into aces, and airfields into crucibles where roles could change in a single morning order. History later recorded Hale as a reminder that war bends expectations and reshapes identities long before the fighting ends. And so the verdict stood. In war, even perfect victories can seal your defeat. But for Hale, the opposite was also true. Sometimes, unexpected battles forge the people who keep others alive to see the next dawn.